I think you would remember the product and services market equilibrium is determined by components such as C, I, G, and X, right? Now, all these components are investments and consumptions in the economy and have to be supported by funds for carrying them out. The participants for the products and services market demand money to influence their respective C or I or G or NX components, and the central bank controls the supply of the money. If the money supply is low, the aggregate output produced will also be low, and hence the aggregate demand would decrease, isn't it? So, money markets equilibrium is an integral part of the overall jigsaw and gels into intricately with the products and services equilibrium. How is the money supply controlled? Through interest rate manipulations again. So, we would cover here the interest rate effects on money supply. So, we discussed two broad concepts: the interest rate effects on the aggregate demand analysis, as we discussed previously, and money demand and supply dynamics as we change the interest rates. In order to do this, we introduce here a new concept called ISLM, which the learners find difficult to understand. For your reference, ISLM stands for Investment Saving or Liquidity Preference Money Supply Model. We would use this model to explain the equilibrium dynamics of both product or services markets and the money markets. Mind you, the price assumption still holds here, so the real and nominal output is still directly proportional to the quantities produced or sold. ISLM model consists of two submodels, IS and LM. IS captures the equilibrium aggregate output versus interest rate movements. This is done in 3 steps. The first step is to examine the effect of interest rates on the components of aggregate demand, that is, consumption, planned investment spending, and net exports. Next, we use the cross diagram that we learned in the previous discussion to see how the interest rate affects the equilibrium level of aggregate output. The resulting relationship between equilibrium aggregate output and the interest rate is known as the IS curve. LM captures the equilibrium interest rate versus aggregate output. This is done in 3 steps. The first step is to examine the effect of aggregate output or national income on money demand. Next, we use the money market dynamics to see how movement in money demand affects the equilibrium level of money market, that is, interest rate. The resulting relationship between equilibrium interest rate and the output or national income is known as the LM curve. The other model, with the LM curve, describes the combinations of interest rates and aggregate output for which the quantity of money demanded equals the quantity of money supplied. So, IS curve maps the interest movements with the product and services market. The LM curve maps the interest movements with the money demand or supply market. Furthermore, just as a demand curve alone cannot tell us the quantity of goods sold in a market, the IS curve by itself cannot tell us what the level of aggregate output will be, because the interest rate is still unknown. Similarly, just as the supply curve alone cannot tell us the quantity of goods sold in the market, the LM curve by itself cannot tell us the equilibrium point. When the IS and LM curves are combined in the same diagram, the intersection of the two determines the equilibrium level of aggregate output as well as the interest rate. This is the point where the aggregate demand is equal to aggregate output in the product and services market, and the money demand is equal to money supply in the money markets. We would build the story step by step in this discussion.